Hello there, law-abiding citizens, and everybody who suddenly switched to drinking grape juice. I'm Ghost, official Shiba Inu, official snack inspector, and today, I'm filling in for the Federal Bureau of Prohibition. That's right. Need to know if your nightclub is legal? We'll inspect it. Our highly trained agents look for suspicious activity such as people having fun, jazz music, dancing, and someone whispering, "Psst, the whiskey's in the coffee pot." Very suspicious. Our investigation includes the latest government techniques, knocking dramatically, breaking up perfectly good parties, confiscating bottles that were absolutely, definitely, going to be used for science. Then we'll proudly arrest the one famous person whose name is on the building. Because paperwork is hard. Silent partners? Never heard of them. Actual financiers? Sounds complicated. Celebrity standing near the piano? Bingo. Case closed. Our agents are specially trained to ignore the mysterious guy in the expensive suit, quietly leaving through the back door, carrying 2 briefcases full of cash. He's probably late for church. Meanwhile, the singer gets tomorrow's headline, Efficiency, at Federal Agent Phil's Speakeasy Inspection Service, TM. We believe every scandal deserves maximum publicity and minimum context. So if you've got a nightclub, a famous name, and absolutely no desire to become tomorrow's newspaper headline, too bad. We'll see you around 10:30 tonight. Bring the handcuffs. I'm Ghost, and remember, if the jazz is swinging, somebody's probably writing a warrant. Disclaimer. The following documentary is based on documented historical evidence. No bootleg whiskey, overworked federal agents, or suspiciously innocent nightclub owners were harmed during the making of this parody. Probably. Federal Agent Phil's Speakeasy Inspection Service. We find trouble. You take the blame. Disclaimer. Before we get started, apparently I have to remind a few people that history doesn't care about your favorite conspiracy theory. If your entire understanding of Helen Morgan comes from a meme, a Facebook post that says, "Trust me, bro," or your Uncle Tony who once watched half a documentary while making spaghetti, you're about to have a rough day. This documentary is based on documented historical evidence, court records, contemporary newspapers, biographies, and historical research. That doesn't mean every question has a perfect answer. It means we're not going to invent one because it sounds cooler. We're also not here to worship celebrities or pretend every famous person was either a flawless angel or a criminal mastermind. Human beings are usually a lot more complicated than that. So grab an espresso, silence your conspiracy alarm, and remember, if verified history offends you, your complaint department is located somewhere between 1927 and reality. Welcome to the Pizzaverse.
Analyzing Hollywood, Helen Morgan, The Voice, The Speakeasy, and the Price of Fame. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Broadway glitter. Bootleg whiskey. Federal raids. And a woman whose voice could bring an entire theater to silence. Helen Morgan became one of the greatest torch singers America ever produced. Audiences knew her as the melancholy queen seated atop a piano, singing songs of heartbreak with a vulnerability that felt almost painfully real. But while America applauded her on Broadway, another America watched her through the windows of illegal nightclubs. For decades, her story has been twisted into something resembling a Hollywood gangster movie, complete with secret mob plots, hidden contracts, corrupt lawyers, and elaborate conspiracies. The truth is both simpler and far more tragic. Tonight, we're separating documented history from sensational legend. We'll explore how Prohibition transformed entertainment, why celebrities became valuable to organized crime without necessarily becoming gangsters themselves, how Helen Morgan became trapped inside one of America's strangest economic experiments, and why her greatest enemy ultimately wasn't a federal agent. It was the bottle. This is the true story of Helen Morgan. And this is Analyzing Hollywood. From poverty to the piano. Long before Broadway applauded her. Before federal agents learned her name. Before newspapers turned her into a prohibition headline. Helen Morgan was simply a young woman searching for a way out. She entered the world as Helen Emma Riggin on August 2nd, 1900, in Danville, Illinois, a small Midwestern town that offered few opportunities for a girl dreaming of a larger stage. Her childhood was far from glamorous. After her parents separated, Helen moved with her mother to Chicago, where the family struggled financially. Like countless working-class Americans at the beginning of the 20th century, survival came before ambition. Formal education ended early, and Helen found work wherever she could, taking ordinary jobs simply to help make ends meet. The future queen of Broadway didn't arrive wrapped in velvet curtains. She earned every step. Chicago, however, offered something her hometown could not. Entertainment. The city pulsed with theaters, dance halls, vaudeville houses, cabarets, and music pouring from nearly every neighborhood. If someone possessed talent, determination, and just enough luck, Chicago could become a doorway to something bigger. Helen chased every opportunity she could find. She entered beauty contests. She worked as a film extra. She studied singing. She auditioned relentlessly. Most of those early performances paid very little. Some barely paid at all. Performers in vaudeville lived exhausting lives. They traveled constantly, worked multiple shows a day, and entertained audiences that often weren't paying much attention. People talked through performances, smoked, drank, laughed with friends, and sometimes treated the stage as little more than background noise. To survive in that environment required more than technical skill. You had to command a room. Helen Morgan eventually discovered exactly how to do that. Unlike many singers of the era, she wasn't known for overwhelming vocal power. She possessed something rarer, an emotional honesty that audiences couldn't quite explain. Her rich contralto voice carried an unmistakable melancholy. Even cheerful melodies seemed to contain traces of longing when she sang them. Listeners often described feeling as though Morgan wasn't performing to a crowd. She was confiding in one person. Then came the image that would define her forever. Rather than standing dramatically at center stage, Helen frequently climbed onto the top of a grand piano, leaning gently toward the audience as she sang. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was intimate. The pose became instantly recognizable. Soon, audiences across America associated the sight of a woman perched atop a piano with Helen Morgan herself. By the mid-1920s, she had become one of the country's most sought-after torch singers, performing in nightclubs, vaudeville theaters, and increasingly fashionable venues across the nation. Success was finally arriving. But it arrived during one of the most unusual periods in American history. The nation had outlawed alcohol. Millions of Americans had decided they didn't particularly care. And before long, Helen Morgan's extraordinary voice would carry her straight into the glittering, dangerous world where Broadway, bootleggers, politicians, celebrities, and organized crime all shared the same tables. She was about to become the soundtrack of Prohibition. The woman who became Julie. By the middle of the 1920s, Helen Morgan had become one of the most recognizable singers in America. Nightclub audiences packed rooms just to hear her. Producers took notice. Broadway came calling. Then, in 1927, one role changed everything. Florence Ziegfeld was preparing a new musical unlike anything audiences had seen before. Based on Edna Ferber's best-selling novel, Showboat confronted subjects that Broadway rarely dared to touch, including racial prejudice, failed marriages, alcoholism, and the emotional cost of living behind carefully constructed identities. The score came from composer Jerome Kern. The lyrics were written by Oscar Hammerstein II. Together, they created what many historians consider one of the greatest American musicals ever produced. Helen Morgan was cast as Julie Laverne. It was the perfect role. Julie was a talented nightclub singer carrying a devastating secret. Beneath her elegance and charm was a woman living with heartbreak, loneliness, and the crushing weight of circumstances she could never fully escape. Morgan didn't merely play Julie. She became her. When she performed Can't Help Lovin' Dat Man, audiences sat in stunned silence. Then came Bill. The song stopped the show night after night. There were no elaborate dance numbers. No spectacular stage tricks. Just Helen Morgan seated atop a piano, singing with a vulnerability so convincing that audiences often believed they were witnessing genuine heartbreak instead of a performance. Critics praised her restraint. She never oversang. She never forced emotion. She simply allowed the music to breathe. That authenticity made her unforgettable. But it also created an unexpected problem. As Showboat became one of Broadway's greatest successes, the line separating Helen Morgan from Julie Laverne began to disappear. Both women were nightclub singers. Both carried an air of quiet sadness. Both seemed haunted by circumstances beyond their control. The public began treating the actress and the character as though they were the same person. Ironically, life would imitate art in ways no playwright could have predicted. While audiences applauded Helen each evening on Broadway, she continued accepting engagements in New York's booming after-hours nightlife. The money was excellent. The crowds adored her. And unlike legitimate theaters, the clubs never seemed to close. There was only one small detail. Almost every one of them served alcohol, which, during Prohibition, was illegal. The same voice filling Broadway's grandest theaters each night was also drawing wealthy patrons into speakeasies after the curtain fell. To customers, it was glamorous. To nightclub owners, she was priceless. To federal agents, she was becoming impossible to ignore. Broadway meets Prohibition. To understand Helen Morgan's story, you first have to understand Prohibition. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment in the Volstead Act went into effect, making the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquor illegal throughout the United States. Supporters believed the law would reduce crime, strengthen families, improve public morals, and create a healthier nation. Instead, America found another way to get a drink. The demand for alcohol never disappeared. It simply went underground. Across the country, hidden bars known as speakeasies appeared behind unmarked doors, in basements, above storefronts, inside warehouses, and behind seemingly respectable businesses. A knock. A password. A trusted introduction. That was often all it took to enter a world the law insisted didn't exist. Inside, the music never seemed to stop. Jazz bands filled the rooms. Cigarette smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Champagne flowed into crystal glasses. Politicians rubbed elbows with businessmen. Actors mingled with socialites. And somewhere in the crowd, gangsters quietly counted the money. Organized crime didn't invent America's thirst. It simply recognized a business opportunity worth millions. Bootlegging became one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in American history. Illegal liquor had to be imported, distilled, transported, stored, protected, and sold. That required trucks, warehouses, corrupt officials, lawyers, bartenders, drivers, lookouts, and places where customers could actually spend their money. That's where the nightclubs came in. A successful club needed more than liquor. It needed excitement. It needed prestige. It needed celebrities. Nothing attracted customers faster than a famous performer whose name appeared on the marquee. Helen Morgan was exactly the kind of attraction every club owner wanted. She was already becoming a Broadway sensation. Her voice was unmistakable. Her image was everywhere. People would gladly pay for the chance to hear her sing while sipping liquor they knew was illegal. Her celebrity transformed ordinary clubs into destinations. That didn't necessarily make her a gangster. It made her valuable. Very valuable. Like many entertainers of the era, Helen moved comfortably between legitimate theaters and the underground nightlife economy. For performers, it wasn't unusual. Broadway salaries could be inconsistent. Nightclubs paid well. Very well. The work kept musicians employed. It kept singers in the public eye. And it placed enormous amounts of cash within easy reach. Of course, easy money usually comes with difficult questions. Who actually owned these clubs? Who supplied the liquor? Who handled the books? Who paid off officials? Who walked away when federal agents kicked in the front door? Those answers were often deliberately hidden. Silent partners stayed silent. Real investors rarely appeared on paperwork. The public face of the business became the person everyone recognized. Sometimes, that was the performer. Helen Morgan's name carried enormous value. Soon, it wouldn't just appear on Broadway playbills. It would appear above the entrance to a nightclub. And that decision would change the course of her life forever. Che Morgan and the Federal Raid. By late 1927, Helen Morgan was living two very different lives. Each evening, she stood beneath the bright lights of Broadway. earning standing ovations for her unforgettable performance as Julie Laverne in Showboat. Later that night, she could often be found performing in New York's thriving Speakeasy scene. The arrangement made perfect business sense. Broadway gave her prestige. The nightclubs gave her money. But during Prohibition, the second job carried consequences. One of the clubs most closely associated with her was Helen Morgan. The very name suggested ownership. Whether that reflected the true financial structure behind the establishment would later become one of the central questions in her legal troubles. Historical accounts indicate that the club was connected to bootlegging interests, with Morgan serving as its public face. Her celebrity brought customers through the door, while the people financing the liquor business largely remained behind the curtain. Then the curtain came down. On December 30th, 1927, federal prohibition agents raided Helen Morgan. The timing couldn't have been worse. Only days earlier, Showboat had opened to extraordinary acclaim, making Helen Morgan one of Broadway's brightest new stars. Now, newspapers had an even bigger story. Broadway's newest sensation, arrested in a prohibition raid. Federal agents searched the club, seized evidence, and arrested those they believed were responsible for violating federal liquor laws. Helen Morgan was among them. The headlines practically wrote themselves. The woman captivating audiences with songs of heartbreak was suddenly portrayed as the glamorous face of New York's illegal nightlife. It was irresistible copy. Some newspapers implied she was operating an illegal liquor business. Others suggested organized crime connections. Speculation spread much faster than verified facts. Morgan denied running the liquor operation. She maintained that she was a performer, not the person directing the illegal sale of alcohol. The legal questions were far more complicated than the newspaper headlines suggested. Who actually owned the business? Who supplied the liquor? Who handled the profits? Who made the decisions? And who simply lent their name and celebrity to the enterprise? Those weren't always the same person. In February 1928, the charges stemming from the first raid were dropped, and the establishment eventually reopened under a different name. For many people, that might have been the end of the story. For Helen Morgan, it was only the beginning. She continued to perform. She continued to appear in nightclubs. And before long, federal agents would come knocking again. The spotlight that had made Helen Morgan famous was now following her for an entirely different reason. This time, it wasn't theater critics sitting in the front row. It was the United States government. Participant or scapegoat. If history were a courtroom drama, this would be the moment when the villain steps into the light, twirls a mustache, confesses to everything, and conveniently explains the entire plot before the closing credits. Unfortunately for Hollywood, real life almost never works that way. Helen Morgan's second arrest in 1928 has often been reduced to two competing stories. In one version, she was nothing more than an innocent Broadway singer tricked by ruthless gangsters. In the other, she was a calculating bootlegger hiding behind celebrity while secretly running an illegal liquor empire. Neither version fits the historical record. The truth sits somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Helen Morgan knew alcohol was being served. There is no serious evidence suggesting otherwise. The musicians knew. The bartenders knew. The waiters knew. The customers certainly knew. Prohibition wasn't some grand secret that only federal agents had figured out. Millions of Americans willingly walked through Speakeasy doors every single week. What made Helen different wasn't that she knew. It was that she was famous. Her name appeared on marquees. Her face sold newspapers. Her photograph drew attention. When a raid happened, reporters weren't interested in the anonymous bartender. They wanted the Broadway star. As her legal troubles continued, prosecutors argued that the clubs operated under her authority and that she bore responsibility for what happened inside them. Her attorneys pushed back. They argued that Helen Morgan was an entertainer and public personality whose name had become attached to businesses managed and financed by others. The distinction mattered. Owning a name wasn't necessarily the same as owning the operation. The financial arrangements behind many Prohibition-era clubs were intentionally complicated. Silent investors stayed silent. Money moved through layers of intermediaries. The people supplying the liquor often remained invisible. The public face remained exactly that: public. Helen Morgan fit that role perfectly. She attracted customers. She attracted publicity. And when federal agents arrived, she attracted arrests. The case moved toward trial, with newspapers covering nearly every development. For prosecutors, convicting a Broadway celebrity demonstrated that prohibition laws applied to everyone. For reporters, every hearing produced another sensational headline. For Helen Morgan, every court appearance became another performance she never wanted to give. Then came the verdict. In April 1929, after hearing the evidence, the jury found Helen Morgan not guilty. That verdict deserves to be remembered. It doesn't erase the arrests. It doesn't erase the headlines. It doesn't erase the humiliation. But it does remind us of something history sometimes forgets. Being accused is not the same as being convicted. The courtroom cleared her. Public opinion wasn't nearly as forgiving. Long after the verdict, many people continued repeating the allegations as though they had been proven fact. It's a lesson that feels surprisingly modern. A dramatic headline can circle the country before breakfast. The acquittal usually arrives somewhere around dessert. Helen Morgan walked out of court a free woman. But she couldn't walk away from the reputation the raids had created. And the greatest challenge of her life was still waiting just beyond the courthouse doors. The price of surviving. For many celebrities, an arrest would have ended everything. The curtain would fall. The phone would stop ringing. The audience would move on to the next rising star. That isn't what happened to Helen Morgan. Despite the raids, despite the headlines, despite months of courtroom drama, Broadway didn't abandon her. Neither did Hollywood. That's an important detail because later retellings often compress her life into a simple tragedy. Raid. Scandal. Career over. Death. Reality was far more complicated. Helen Morgan survived. In 1929, she appeared in the part-talking film version of Showboat, giving movie audiences their first glimpse of the woman who had made Julie Laverne a Broadway legend. That same year, director Ruben Mamoulian cast her in Applause, a groundbreaking film that showcased Morgan's remarkable ability as a dramatic actress. Critics praised her performance. She wasn't simply a singer who happened to appear on screen. She could act. She carried emotion with the same quiet power that had made audiences fall in love with her voice. Broadway welcomed her back as well. She starred in Sweet Adeline, another production by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II, proving that producers still believed in her talent despite the public controversies surrounding her. For a while, it looked as though she had escaped the worst. But surviving a courtroom is not the same thing as surviving life. Behind the applause, another battle had already begun. Alcohol had always been part of the world she inhabited. Nightclubs revolved around it. Speakeasies depended on it. Celebrations included it. Business deals were made over it. Success was toasted with it. Failure was drowned in it. For years, drinking had been part of the atmosphere surrounding Helen Morgan's career. Gradually, it became something much more personal. Friends and colleagues noticed the change. Her drinking grew heavier. Performances became less predictable. Professional reliability began to suffer. The sorrow audiences admired on stage was no longer confined to her performances. It had followed her home. Her personal life became increasingly turbulent. Relationships struggled. Financial pressures mounted. The emotional burden of constant public attention never truly disappeared. Yet through it all, she continued returning to the role that had made her famous. Julie Laverne wasn't simply a character anymore. She had become inseparable from Helen Morgan herself. It was a remarkable achievement, and in many ways, a heartbreaking one. Because while audiences continued applauding the woman on the piano, the woman behind the performance was slowly beginning to disappear. The battle no jury could win. By the mid-1930s, Helen Morgan had beaten the charges. She had survived the headlines. She had outlasted the scandal. But there was one opponent she could never cross-examine: alcohol. For years, audiences had associated Helen with smoky nightclubs, late-night performances, and songs soaked in heartbreak. What many people didn't realize was that the line between the performance and the performer was beginning to disappear. The sadness wasn't always acting anymore. It was becoming her reality. Still, there were flashes of the brilliance that had made her famous. In 1936, Universal Pictures released its lavish film adaptation of Showboat. Once again, Helen Morgan stepped into the role of Julie Laverne. Nearly a decade had passed since she first introduced the character to Broadway audiences. But when she sang Bill, something extraordinary happened. Time seemed to stop. Her voice had aged. Her face showed the strain of years spent under relentless public scrutiny. But the emotion, the vulnerability, the quiet ache that had always defined her performances, it was still there. Many critics considered her scenes among the emotional highlights of the film. For new audiences, This became the performance that preserved Helen Morgan for history. Ironically, while the movie immortalized her talent, her health was quietly deteriorating. Alcoholism doesn't arrive all at once. It takes small pieces. A missed rehearsal, a forgotten appointment, a strained friendship, a damaged reputation, then another, and another. Eventually, people stop asking if you're having a bad day. They begin wondering if you'll make it at all. By the late 1930s, Helen's professional opportunities became increasingly limited. Studios hesitated. Producers worried. Stage commitments became more difficult to keep. At the same time, America itself was changing. Prohibition had ended in 1933 with the ratification of the 21st Amendment. The speakeasies that had once made fortunes either became legitimate bars or disappeared altogether. The underground glamour faded. The bootleggers found new businesses. The public found new stars. The world that had helped build Helen Morgan's image no longer existed. But its consequences remained. She made one final return to Julie Laverne in a 1940 Los Angeles stage revival of Showboat. It was fitting. The role that had launched her career would also become one of her last great performances. By then, those closest to her could see the toll. She tired easily. Her body was failing. The applause still came, but it could no longer drown out the damage years of alcoholism had done. No federal raid had accomplished this. No prosecutor. No newspaper headline. The greatest threat Helen Morgan ever faced had been waiting backstage the entire time, and it was preparing to take its final bow. The myths that refuse to die. Every famous tragedy attracts storytellers. Some preserve history. Others improve it. Or at least they think they do. Somewhere along the way, Helen Morgan's life stopped being complicated enough for certain writers. The real story became buried beneath a mountain of dramatic embellishments. Suddenly, every setback had a secret mastermind. Every arrest became part of a grand conspiracy. Every coincidence transformed into a carefully orchestrated plot. It's a great movie. It just isn't supported by the evidence. One name appears again and again in these retellings. Larry Fay. Fay was no choir boy. He was a well-known New York racketeer and nightclub owner who profited from Prohibition-era bootlegging, entertainment venues, taxi operations, and other criminal enterprises. He moved comfortably through the worlds of celebrities, politicians, wealthy patrons, and organized crime. So yes, Helen Morgan and Larry Fay existed in the same Prohibition nightlife. That part is true. Where the history becomes shaky is everything that follows. Claims that Fay secretly built the Helen Morgan Club as an elaborate legal trap. That he intentionally placed every criminal liability in Helen's name. That he orchestrated her arrests. That he manipulated lawyers behind the scenes. That he controlled newspaper coverage. Or that he deliberately stole her fortune. None of those claims are established by reliable historical evidence. That doesn't mean organized crime wasn't involved in New York nightlife. It absolutely was. It doesn't mean bootleggers didn't profit from celebrity. They certainly did. And it doesn't mean performers couldn't be exploited by powerful investors working quietly behind the scenes. They often were. But history demands something more than a dramatic theory. It demands proof. The documented record tells us that Helen Morgan willingly performed in speakeasies, allowed her name to be attached to illegal clubs, was arrested, stood trial, and was ultimately acquitted. Everything beyond those established facts requires evidence, not imagination. Ironically, Larry Fay's own story ended with far less mystery than the legends surrounding Helen Morgan. On January 1st, 1933, Fay was shot and killed at his Casablanca nightclub by Edward Maloney, a disgruntled employee who reportedly believed he had been cheated out of wages. It wasn't the ending of a grand criminal conspiracy. It was a violent dispute that reflected the dangerous world Fay had chosen to inhabit. By then, America itself was changing. Only months later, Prohibition would come to an end. The illegal empire that had produced fortunes, fueled corruption, and transformed nightlife was beginning to collapse. But Helen Morgan's greatest struggle had never been prohibition alone. The headlines faded. The court cases ended. The speakeasies disappeared. Alcohol remained, and unlike the myths, that part of her story is painfully real. The final performance. By 1940, Helen Morgan had spent nearly 2 decades living beneath America's spotlight. She had climbed from poverty to Broadway. She had become one of the defining voices of the jazz age. She had survived federal raids, public scandal, courtroom battles, and endless newspaper headlines. But fame has a cruel habit. It applauds you at your strongest, then quietly watches when you're at your weakest. In 1940, Helen returned one final time to the role that had made her immortal. Julie Laverne. Audiences still recognized the magic. When she sang, they could still hear the emotional honesty that no amount of time had managed to erase. But those closest to her knew the truth. Her health was failing. Years of alcoholism had taken an enormous toll on her body. In 1941, hoping to rebuild her career once again, Helen married Lloyd Johnston, who also served as her manager. She joined a touring production of George White's Scandals, determined to prove she still had more performances left to give. It would be her last tour. During the production, Helen became gravely ill. She was hospitalized in Chicago. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes waiting for her. No federal agents. No secret mob boss arriving for one final confrontation. Just doctors. Family, friends, and the devastating consequences of years of alcohol abuse. Her liver was failing. On October 9th, 1941, Helen Morgan died in Chicago. She was only 41 years old. The official cause of death was cirrhosis of the liver. It is tempting to search for a single villain, to blame one gangster, one nightclub, one arrest, one bad decision. History rarely gives us that luxury. Helen Morgan's tragedy wasn't created in a single night. It unfolded over years. She made choices. Some opened doors. Some closed them forever. She chose to work in the lucrative world of prohibition nightlife. She accepted the opportunities that fame and celebrity offered. She also lived inside an entertainment industry dominated by powerful businessmen, hidden investors, illegal liquor, and relentless public attention. She benefited from that world. She was also damaged by it. Both things can be true at the same time. That is what makes her story so compelling. Helen Morgan was neither a helpless victim nor an underworld mastermind. She was an extraordinarily talented artist, navigating an era where success often came wrapped in extraordinary risk. The nightclub owners needed a famous name. The bootleggers needed paying customers. The newspapers needed sensational headlines. Federal agents needed highly visible arrests. Everyone found a use for Helen Morgan. Until they didn't. Yet despite everything, the scandals, the arrests, the rumors, the myths, the illness. When history remembers Helen Morgan today, it doesn't begin with a courtroom. It begins with a piano, a lonely spotlight, and a voice so heartbreakingly honest that, nearly a century later, it still has the power to stop listeners in their tracks. That, more than the headlines, is her true legacy. History has a way of sanding off the rough edges. Over time, complicated lives become simple stories. Heroes become saints. Villains become monsters. And people caught somewhere in the middle often disappear altogether. Helen Morgan deserves better than that. She wasn't the innocent pawn described by every romantic retelling. She also wasn't the criminal mastermind imagined by sensational headlines. She was an artist. A woman who climbed from poverty to become one of Broadway's brightest stars through extraordinary talent and relentless determination. She willingly stepped into the glittering world of prohibition nightlife because that world rewarded entertainers with fame, money, and opportunity. It also exposed them to enormous legal, financial, and personal risks. When federal agents raided the clubs, her celebrity made her the face everyone recognized. When newspapers needed a headline, her name sold copies. When audiences wanted tragedy, she seemed born to play the part. Yet, the most devastating battle of her life wasn't fought in a courtroom. It wasn't against organized crime. It wasn't against the federal government. It was against alcoholism. That battle slowly stole her health, her reliability, and ultimately her life. Helen Morgan died at just 41 years old. But her voice survived. Every recording reminds us why audiences fell silent when she sang. Every performance of Julie Laverne still carries traces of the woman who created the role. And every retelling of her life challenges us to separate documented history from comforting myths. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need embellishment. A poor girl from Illinois became one of the defining voices of the jazz age. She stood at the top of Broadway. She survived public scandal and walked out of a courtroom acquitted. She continued performing long after many believed her career was over. And in the end, the brightest spotlight of her life illuminated not only her triumphs, but every mistake, every heartbreak, and every painful step of her decline. That is the real story of Helen Morgan. And sometimes, the truth is far more haunting than the legend.
Before you go, if you enjoyed this documentary and appreciate carefully researched stories that separate historical fact from popular myth, you're exactly where you belong. Welcome to the Pizzaverse. Around here, we don't glorify organized crime. We don't rewrite history. And we don't chase conspiracy theories just because they make flashy thumbnails. We dig through the evidence. We compare the sources. We challenge the legends. Then we tell the story as honestly as the historical record allows. Whether we're exploring the hidden psychology of famous criminals, the forgotten truths behind fairy tales, the secrets of old Hollywood, or the real history of organized crime, our goal is always the same: to uncover what actually happened. If that's the kind of content you enjoy, help us keep growing. Hit like if you enjoyed the documentary. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. And leave a comment below. Tell me, what old Hollywood story should we investigate next? As always, thank you for supporting independent documentary storytelling. The Pizzaverse keeps growing because of viewers like you. Until next time, keep asking questions. Keep challenging the myths. The brightest spotlight of her life illuminated not only her triumphs, but every mistake, every heartbreak, and every painful step of her decline. That is the real story of Helen Morgan. And sometimes, the truth is far more haunting than the legend. Male Shiba Inu dog narrating. To every member of the Pizzaverse, thank you. Seriously. There are millions of videos competing for your attention every single day. And the fact that you chose to spend your time here means more than you probably realize. Whether you've been here since the beginning or you discovered this channel 5 minutes ago, welcome to the family. Your views, your comments, your corrections, your discussions, and your support help keep these documentaries alive. Together, we're building something that values evidence over rumors, history over mythology, and curiosity over clickbait. Every documentary starts with a question. Every answer leads to another mystery. And we've only scratched the surface. If you enjoyed today's journey into the life of Helen Morgan, share it with someone who loves old Hollywood, Broadway history, or the fascinating world of Prohibition. The more people who discover these stories, the more forgotten voices get a chance to be heard again. From all of us here at Pizzaverse Studios, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And until next time, keep your curiosity alive. Keep your espresso hot. And remember, the spotlight may fade, but a great story never does. I'm Ghost. And as always, in the Pizzaverse, we don't rewrite history, we excavate it. I'll see you in the next documentary. Helen Morgan, 1900 to 1941. Broadway's voice, Prohibition's worst public relations department. Helen Morgan wasn't a mob queen, nor was she an innocent bystander who accidentally wandered into a speakeasy carrying a lemonade. She was one of Broadway's greatest torch singers, whose fame made her valuable to nightclub owners and highly visible to federal agents. Acquitted in court, she ultimately lost her hardest fight to alcoholism, not the law. Larry Fay, 1894 to 1933. Proof that owning nightclubs during Prohibition was not exactly a low-stress career choice. Larry Fay was a notorious New York racketeer who made fortunes from bootlegging, entertainment, and other criminal ventures. Popular legends often cast him as the puppet master behind Helen Morgan's downfall, but the historical evidence doesn't support those dramatic claims. His own story ended violently when he was shot by a disgruntled employee in 1933. Tommy Stig's Social Club Fudge. One bite, your family. Some people join exclusive clubs. Some people spend years trying to earn respect. Some people just buy another boring box of chocolates. Those people have made terrible life decisions. Introducing Tommy Stig's Social Club Fudge. The only fudge handcrafted with rich dark chocolate, bold espresso, creamy mascarpone, roasted Sicilian pistachios, and crunchy cannoli shell pieces. It's the kind of dessert that walks into the room like it already owns the place. Every bite starts with deep Italian espresso, hits you with silky chocolate, finishes with buttery pistachios and sweet cannoli crunch, and leaves you wondering why you've wasted your life eating grocery store fudge. Made for coffee drinkers, late-night storytellers, neighborhood legends, and that one guy who says, "I'm only having one piece," before mysteriously making half the box disappear. Each premium gift box arrives dressed in gunmetal gray, royal blue, and silver. Because if you're gonna eat fudge, eat it like you've got standards. Perfect with espresso. Perfect with bourbon. Perfect while arguing over who makes the best Sunday gravy. We won't settle that debate. But we can promise one thing. Nobody argues once the fudge comes out. Tommy Stig's Social Club Fudge. One bite, your family. No membership dues. No secret handshake. No sitting at the kids' table. Just ridiculously good fudge. Order yours today, before somebody in the family accidentally finishes your box. Tommy Stig's Social Club Fudge. Because life is too short for cheap chocolate. And around here, dessert is serious business.
How'd that cross necklace get over your horns? You know the saying, I bet you be sweating like a whore in church, spending too much time trying to hide behind the Bible. Get in front of it, find out that Jesus was a foreigner. Virgin Mary, you would've deported her. Not before your husband found out she was a minor, he'd have ordered her. Him and his buddies would've recorded her, transported her, extorted her, and then sent her to the coroner. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. I'm pretty sure that God's annoyed of racists bringing him up. Sick of you chumps showing up to take a sip of the cup. You called the Aztec savages, but the cup, isn't it blood? Isn't the stuff symbolic? Oh, it's different, huh? Introduction to blood sacrifice. He died so you can't commit your crimes. Here's the hoping he come back to life. I can't wait to see the face on every single preacher's wife. All them secrets you been keeping, tell me how you sleep at night. All them evil things you feeling, don't leave cause you be polite. Cause this even and the thieving ain't concealed as recondite. Only a few people know. And you know why they keep it tight. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. Weaponized all of it, don't know what a proverb is. Cherry picking Bible scripts, oh my God. Arrogance, lying in the Lord names ain't honoring. Pride leading the blind again, oh my God. You must be drunk off the blood of Christ. Or maybe you just back hitting the hooch again. Or back to cosplaying a hooligan. The grip, the cross, to get the dollars like what? Now you forgot where you in your Gucci bins? You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians.